Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wildlife Semi-Filtered, where the audio and visual content is subpar and inadequate, as well as the wildlife expertise. I am your host, Dr. Blake Grisham, an associate professor in the Department of Natural Resources Management at Texas Tech University. Joining me on the call today, a Zoom call, are the TTU TWS officers and our special guest, Clint Perkins, who is a graduate student in the Department of Natural Resources Management. I'll get to him in just a second, and I'll turn over the broadcast to his research on endangered skunks, which I'm thoroughly looking forward to. Before we begin, though, I'd like to bring everyone's attention once again to the TTU TWS website for our students, as well as this week, I've been practicing online content, both via podcast on Anchor and YouTube, and I am not good at it. That said, we do have an Anchor podcast. You can stream this on Spotify. If you go to Anchor, search for Wildlife Semi-Filtered, you will come to the gray website there, and these live streams will be ultimately filtered out and put on here on Saturday or Sunday after the stream. I am learning how to use Audacity from my friend Rachel, whose tag name is Flying Cypress, and I did put the previous stream up there, but it's nothing but muffled noises from background noise. So I am a wildlife biologist. I am not an audio engineer. So that said, while you have nothing else to do during the quarantine, check it out. Listen to the podcast. The last stream was about our TTU, Texas Tech University Student Chapter of the Wildlife Society, their experiences and time during NRM. We played a few games, and more importantly, we just had a little bit of fun seeing each other again, at least virtually, and hanging out and talking about our quarantine experiences. With that said, I'm going to switch over the stream to our desktop view. And like I said earlier, our special guest is Clint Perkins. As I navigate the world of Windows, which I'm also bad at, Clint has a. I'm just going to put it on here on the screen because it's awesome. Well, actually, I don't know if you can see or not. Because I'm learning how to do this. He has an impressive resume, and we are lucky to have him here at Texas Tech. From 2002 to 2010, he was with Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. And Clint, feel free to chime in here because I don't know what an ADC operator is. Uh, um, and then for the same time, he was also with on the Nuisance Alligator Program. 2011, he was with Colorado State, I assume. Is that correct? Or someone
That's
else?
correct.
That is
Yeah.
correct. Invasive plant technician, small mammal tech with MOFEP. I don't know again who that is. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He was a mesocarnivore tech with Utah State. Waterfowl tech with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries biologist 1 or 2 from 2013 and 15. Angelo State University Research Associate Assistant, 2015, 2017. If I'm correct, that's when you were doing your Master of Science degree. Is that
Right.
correct? Okay. And then again, avian technician with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, 2017. And in Southwest Florida in 2018, he was a wildlife technician for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Currently, in 2018, he started his PhD program under Dr. Richard Stevens. That's correct, Dr. Stevens? And then you have a co-PI at Angelo State. Is that correct?
That's correct. Bob
Uh,
Dowler.
okay. One more time, please.
Bob Dowler.
Okay. Welcome for all of our viewers who are here to hear Clint talk about skunks in various capacities. I am all about this. I am really excited because I am a very mediocre bird biologist and I'd like to learn more about skunks. So with that, I'm going to turn everything over to Clint. He has a couple of presentations for us. If you have comments or questions, feel free to put it in the chat box on stream. I will relay those to Clint and or after when we're finished, I'll ultimately leave it up to him. But What I do like to see from our audience is interactions. It makes it a lot more fun from us. So go ahead and ask us questions as we go. But Clint, the audience is yours. Take it away, sir.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Grisham, for that wonderful introduction. So I've got just three really casual, hopefully really fun presentations to talk to you folks about tonight. And my first one is just kind of reiterating the tale there that Dr. Grisham was just telling. How I went from a fairly unsuccessful student to your screen here this evening. And then I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to just give a real basic primer into skunks in general. And then we're going to finish up with just talking about my current research, the stuff I did as a master's student, and then now with tech. So getting started, I am from LeCount, Louisiana, which is a small town in central Louisiana. Had this really rural upbringing with just a lot of consumptive use. And as Dr. Grisham was saying, I spent most of the aughts licensed by the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, both as a nuisance wildlife control operator for mammals, and then as an alligator hunter, a nuisance alligator hunter for the state. And it was during this time that I started really honing a lot of my field skills, then a lot of my soft skills. But one of the things that I really, really enjoyed doing was different types of outreach programs. You'll see in that top picture there, that's me skinning an alligator. And I think that was at one of the National Hunting and Fishing Day programs. So I ended up doing that, oh, I don't know, 40 or 50 times throughout the decade there. At the same time, I was a student at LSUA from 2002 to 2011. And if you're doing the math there, it was about 9.5 years it took me to graduate with my BS. 8 of those, I was enrolled in school and taking classes the entire time. And essentially, I was doing all the trapping stuff and the alligator stuff, and I just wasn't a good student. A lot of the pitfalls of not attending classes, not joining any of the organizations there on campus, not developing any type of mentorship with any of my professors. And in the top right there, my eventual mentor, Dr. Carol Corbett, she sat me down in 2009 and said, you've either got to become serious about school and start doing right, or you need to leave. And she put the fear of God in me, and there within a week, I went from all these grandiose ideas of continuing my life as a trapper and an alligator hunter to just completely throwing that aside and becoming serious about my schoolwork. In 2011, I was fortunate enough to do 2 undergrad research projects with her. One was on mesocarnivores out in the local national forest. And then one of them was on small mammals there on property actually on LSUA. But one of the really, really cool things that I was able to do during this time, and actually have done this ever since, is that Carol was developing a wildlife techniques course. And she didn't have a lot of experience with trapping mesocarnivores. And I obviously had a lot of experience. So she actually let me come in and teach the lectures and labs in 2011 while I was taking the course on these subjects. And ever since then, that class is taught every 2 years, and I'll do my best to travel back to LSUA and put on these courses. And ever since 2011, it's really changed a good bit. It went from strictly fur bearing stuff to research with mesocarnivores. We started catching coyotes and bringing them in alive. And this animal here in the bottom right, it's not anesthetized, so that's one of the things they get to learn is how you handle a coyote without anesthetizing it, and how to take all the biological samples and measurements and stuff like that. And the students really seem to enjoy um, that portion of the lab. All right, so as Dr. Grisham was saying, I had a fairly extensive technician type career. And since you went over most of it, I guess I'll just hit the real highlights here. So MOFEP, I thought you would have known about that, Dr. Grisham, but that's the Missouri Ozone Forest Ecosystem Project. And it's really, really cool because they have about 16 different parameters that they study up there in southeastern Missouri. And this project is funded for 100 years, and it's only about 25 years into the project. So that's a really, really fun thing. And then, I was in North Dakota in 2012, and one of the really great things we got to do up there was we got to go out and ban white pelicans. So you can see that's me. I've got my Tyvek on there. I've got this juvenile pelican between my legs, and there was 80 or 85 of us out there in that crash that morning. And I think we did right around 1,200 white pelicans. So, I mean, just really intensive, really fun. And then right after that, I went to Utah and I got to work with kit foxes and coyotes and catching them and tracking them. And that position was really, really instrumental in what I eventually, the way I set up my dissertation project. And then, in Louisiana, I went back and I took a biologist position for a few years, and it was a good job. I worked with a lot of great people, but the truth of the matter is I was chasing oiled wildlife and looking at oil spills all over the state, and then I just wanted something a little more. So I decided to, get out of there. And when I did, I knew I had to go back to grad school. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But the students on here, and Dr. Grisham as well, have been talking about some of their favorite experiences in the field. And this is probably where I had my favorite experience. So what we were doing was we were banding mottled ducks. And for those that don't know, the way that we were doing it is we'd go out into the coastal marshes at night in an airboat. And it was during the summer on a night with a low tide. And the young of the year hadn't quite fledged yet, so they were flightless. And the adults were during their summer molt, so they were flightless. And what happens is, you get out there, you start spotlighting, you'd see a big group of them up on a mud flat, and the driver would just run you right straight through the group of them, and they'd start taking off swimming and running, and you'd lean 2/3 of your body outside of the airboat and just grab the birds off the water. You turn around and you put them in a catch bin, and while you were doing that, he's then turned the airboat around, and he's looking to pick up stragglers, and you go run back to them again and get some more. And by this time, they're getting close to the marsh grass. So they'll run up in the marsh grass and try to disappear, but the driver will just run you right up there on their tail, and you jump out and just start trapping them in the marsh grass against your body. So that was a lot of fun. And, some nights we did all right, 25 to 30, but I remember a few nights with 60 or 70 birds that we caught. And then kind of the last thing I'll talk about is in 2018, I went down to the Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge. And as where, my previous jobs, it was, one or two things I was doing. Once you got down there was just so much going on. It was such a blast. There was, I don't even know, 10, 15 different types of surveys we were doing down there. And it was nothing to, go out and in 3 successive days do surveys for 3 different endangered species. I remember one time on one of the barrier islands down there, getting out and within an hour seeing 3 different endangered species. We were doing the turtle nest monitoring, so we saw a turtle nest, and then we got up there and there was some least terns that had just started nesting. And as we were watching them, we just happened to look over our shoulder into the water, and there was 2 sawfish there swimming around. So just an amazing biodiversity down there, and just all kinds of different surveys and fun stuff. I really enjoyed my time down there. So this is just kind of, a splash page of everywhere I've worked, the ecosystems, the agencies, and kind of how I've got some of those positions. So, for some of you younger professionals here, I would definitely say, get out there, cast a very wide net when you're first getting started. All right. So in 2015, I was recruited to Angelo State to work with Bob Dowler on spotted skunks. And truth of the matter is that he was a little hesitant to take me because of taking 9.5 years to do an undergrad. But I kept very persistent. I kept respectfully pestering him about the position, and he eventually relented. And it's kind of been all downhill or all uphill since then. And I'm not going to talk too much right now about my actual thesis work, but I will say that in 2016, I had the opportunity to travel to Costa Rica and Nicaragua, and there was just tons of biodiversity, catching a lot of animals. I think my bird list down there was around 220, and 90% of those were all lifers. So that was just a really amazing experience, and one of my highlights from my time at Angelo. So in 2017, the fall there, Bob and I were in this really enviable position in that we were just finishing up the contract that I did my master's on, and the funding agency was actually pestering us to submit a new proposal so that they could give us more money to continue working on spotted skunks. And Bob and I both agreed that we wanted to continue working with each other, and we needed to find a place for me to do my PhD. And Bob had a really nice professional relationship with Richard Stevens in NRM, and I had met Richard a few times and his students a few times at meetings, and I knew what they were about, the type of research they were putting out, and moreover, I knew the reputation, especially within the mammal communities of Texas Tech, and the research and the students they're putting out. So it was a no-brainer to hook up with Richard and continue this work. So I've been at Tech since August of 2018. However, 3rd of January last year, I went to the field, and I haven't been back since. And I'll have at least 6 more months in the field and maybe another year. And I'll talk about my dissertation work here in a bit. So if anybody has any questions, I'm about to change over PowerPoints. Now would be a good time to answer or ask.
Yeah, while you do that, I'm going to turn it back over to our logo. If anyone has any questions for Clint, please put them in the chat. It sounds like you have quite the diversity of skills and ecosystem experience and animal experience. Was that a golden or a bald eagle that you had in your hands?
What was that?
Was that a golden or a bald eagle you had?
That was a bald eagle. Died of, or fell out the nest from some type of mosquito-borne illness, and we were able to get it to a rehab, but it didn't make it.
Unfortunate. There was recent news this week that Arizona has their first nesting pair of bald eagles in the state, and it was going around on Facebook. They are actually nesting in a saguaro cactus, which is the ultimate eagle move. Clint, I got another question for you. The bat you were holding up in the photo from your trip from Costa Rica, what type of bat was that?
That was a lesser bulldog bat. So that's I should have mentioned it a little more. So that's actually a fish-eating bat, and if you looked at its feet there, you can see kind of the adaptations for reaching down and grabbing fish off the top of the water. And then another real interesting thing is they have oil glands that they use to keep their wings waterproof so that they can go down there and hit the water and grab the fish.
Can you go back up one slide and show our viewers that bat one more time? I thought it was pretty cool.
Sure.
Up on slide 7. Because I have another question about it. I just need to point it out too.
So that you don't get too in depth.
No, I was just curious. Why is the underside of the belly yellow? Is that pollen or is that the skin of the animal?
No, that's just the color of the bat. It's a real light colored bat, and then I think also the way the light hitting the animals kind of distorting the color a little bit.
Okay, so a general question about bats. You said they have specializations for their on this species and their feet. How is this one's different? Is it just longer toes spread out, or do you know?
Oh, well, you're getting me into stuff I don't know too much, but if you look at the foot there, you can see, maybe if I zoom in a little bit. So you can see those really long toes, and then you can see the really long claws there that are for actually grasping the fish and holding on to the fish.
That is amazing. I can see why it's called a bulldog bat now. That is amazing. And is some type of anteater in the other photo?
That is yeah, that's a northern mandua. It just happened to be there on that vine at about eye level, and we had somebody run to go get another group, and while they were doing that, the anteater decided he wanted to leave, so I just kind of held him there for a minute until that other group got there and could get a real good look at it.
Awesome. I have one more question for you. Sophie, are you not able to share the screen right now? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I did the wrong thing. Ah, sorry. See, there you go. You should be able to see it now because I am bad with screen. So Clint, can you go back to that bat one more time, please? There you go, Sophie. Thank you. Guys on the chat, remind me, this is my third week at being a podcast entrepreneur, and I absolutely have no clue what I am doing. So thank you, Rachel and Sophie, for. So he was talking about the elongated feet here on this bat. It's specialized for capturing fish, small fish, not like a blue catfish or anything.
No, I don't think they're very big, but then again,
That would be
that's a
amazing.
fairly robust bat.
That would be amazing. And then the only other thing I said was that that's a face only a bulldog lover could love, and I know that because I have bulldogs. Um, I have one more question for you, and it's on the next slide about the young man in the photos.
Oh, I'm
I
glad
told,
you brought that up.
that's our boy Jorge.
Yes, you
So
guys
go
were
ahead,
kind
talk
of,
great things about Jorge. I love that kid.
yeah, you guys were kind of running him down last week talking about him and the prairie chicken, and I got to say, I just didn't see it. Jorge came and he interned with me for 3 weeks.
Well,
Over,
we were picking on him and being unfair because everyone has that horror story from the field where something goes awry. And his happened to be in front of like 20 other people. So I never let it down because that kid has the greatest attitude of, of anyone. He made a mistake, wasn't a big deal. We fixed the problem. And then the one thing I did mention was the next day when we went out to capture chickens, he went right back at it. He wasn't even remotely scared to get in there and work the animals up. And he's great in the classroom. So last week we dug in on him a bit. Hopefully it was all in good fun. But I love Jorge. He's one of the few students who actually can banter Star Wars with me. Most of the kids are too young and/or undisciplined in the ways of the Force, so they don't know Star Wars banter. But Jorge can, especially prequel stuff. So it was Jorge your technician?
yeah, he was an intern over winter break, and man, he came out and just did an amazing job. I think he got a little over 140 hours during that time frame of about GSO3 level work, and he got to do some veg surveys. He got to do some camera trap surveys, and he got to do a fair amount of live trapping. And he caught his first 4 or 5, I think, striped skunks.
Mm-hmm.
And then the week we were trapping spotted skunks, Jorge was the rock star. He caught 2 of the 3 that week.
Good for him. And if anyone on the stream is hiring, I highly recommend Jorge. And while we're at it, who's the other young scientist in the photo down there?
So that's Cameron. Cameron is one of the grad students for Angelo State.
Oh, very good. And I suspected I saw her roaming around in the field house earlier.
Yeah, I think you did.
And I got one more question. So there is obviously a difference between the skunks in those two photos, or is it
Right.
my tricking me? So the top one is what type of skunk?
The top one is the spotted, and the bottom one is the striped. And I've got some slides that details a bunch of the differences between the species coming up next.
Great. With that segue, we'll lead into it unless our viewers have any additional questions for Clint about his time as a student and getting experience to go into grad school. So we'll give them just a few seconds because there is about a 10-second, 20-second delay. Um, so if you want to go ahead and pull up your other PowerPoint while we're doing that, I'll read off any questions that anyone may have.
I will. I will say as we're turning this over that I think a couple weeks ago somebody was. I'm having some trouble here. Somebody was asking or saying their. Come on now, man. Oh, their burning lifer list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
that was one of my first podcasts there.
yeah, well, in the chat, somebody put swallowtail kite.
That was
And
Rachel, flying cypress, because that's our animal that we like.
yeah, been there, did that when I was in Florida.
Very nice. They're also all over. So I did my MS in Louisiana at LSU at the main campus in Baton Rouge, and I lived in the Sherburne Wildlife Management Area for 2.5 years. Uh, I, when you said LSU at Alexandria, it was kind of hit home. It was very nice, and Rachel said she's jealous that the last time I saw kites were actually in Florida as well. So,
Well,
do any of our student officers? Do you guys have any questions for Clint while he pulls up his other PowerPoint?
Oh, they could switch this over.
Okay.
Oh, there it is. Finally, I'm getting to where I need to be.
Big view of us all.
Right. Sorry about that, guys.
No worries. Proceed, please, sir.
All right. So right now I'm gonna talk about what is a skunk and a little bit of the differences between some of the species. And I've given this presentation or some form of it to quite a few master naturalist groups and a lot of citizen scientist type groups. And I like to kind of start out, and you guys can kind of answer some of this stuff if you have some good guesses in the chat. But what's your idea of what is a skunk? Or what's your idea of what is a skunk? How many species are there, both in the world? How many are in Texas? Do you know any of them other than the ubiquitous striped skunk? If anybody has anything, I'll be checking out the chat. All right, so what is a skunk? So most of you guys probably know this little feller, the striped skunk, and that's probably in your mind's eye what you think of when you think of a skunk. And maybe if not a foraging striped skunk, well, you've definitely probably seen and smelled something like this. We're just coming out of the yearly Methodist massacre where it's breeding season for all the skunks here in Texas, and the road mortality is just super high. And maybe a few of you have even seen a little something like this, where you've seen the end results of this type of interaction, and you had to run to the internet to look up the best way to de-skunk your dog. So what is a skunk? So skunks are mammals, and they're carnivores, and they're in a unique family called Mephididae. Now, these guys are mesocarnivores, which just means that they're just not quite as large as some of your larger carnivores, your pumas, your bears, your coyotes. They fit a niche that's just below that. It means that some of these larger animals can be feeding upon them as prey base. As a rule, they're primarily insectivorous, and they have some really unique adaptations for foraging. Notably, they've got really elongated front claws, and they have really adapted noses, and a lot of them have kind of this elongated snout. But by far, the two most characteristic things about skunks are their striking black and white warning coloration, which warns animals, potential predators, that, hey, we've got this noxious anal secretion, and if you come too close to me, I'm going to give it to you. And for those that don't know, on either side of the sphincter, there's actually two glands, and just inside the sphincter, there's actually two nipples on either side. And whenever the animal is threatened and it feels like it needs to spray, kind of the sphincter inverts a little bit and the nipples come out, and that's when they give the spray. A lot of folks think that skunks kind of only as a New World type species. Sorry, I had an ant crawling on my computer. But they're actually found on 3 different continents. And I'm going to kind of just mention this. I really don't know too much about these 2 species. So the old world distribution is for, colloquially, they're called stink badgers. And if you go back to what I was telling you, the skunk is noxious anal spray, black and white warning coloration, long paws, elongated snout. It's pretty safe to say that, you know, these guys definitely fit that bill from morphology alone. And these 2 species of stink badgers, they're actually over in Indonesia and Malaysia. And that's about all I know about them. So that's all I'm going to talk about. All right. So I didn't see any guesses in there as to skunk numbers and stuff like that. So there's actually in the New World, there's 3 different genera of skunks, and that's the Conopatus, which are colloquially known as the hognose skunks, and Spilagale, and they're colloquially known as spotted skunks, and then Methodus, which is the hooded skunk and the striped skunk. There's 10 species, and the distribution of these guys is from the very tip of South America all the way into the Arctic Circle. And the reason why Texas is the best place to study skunks is because in the United States, there's 5 different species of skunks. In Texas, there's 5 different species of skunks. And there are 0 other states in the nation that can lay this claim. Alrighty, so looking at Methodus, so these are, excuse me, this is your striped skunk on the right there and your hooded skunk on the left. And these are kind of your larger bodied, very lumbering type, is what you think about when you think of these guys. They have extreme variability in their coloration. So the striped skunk on the right there, that's the most well-known and common pattern. But those guys can literally be anything from all black to all white. And the hooded skunk there, it has that color morph. And then I don't know if you can see there on its kind of its shoulders, there's some white stripes, some white lateral lines, if you will. And the 2 different variations for hooded skunks is what you see. And then the other one, there's no white other than those lateral lines. The hooded skunk within the state of Texas is primarily only in the Trans-Pecos and primarily in the Big Bend area. They're a little bit more common in Arizona and New Mexico, and then throughout the more arid areas of Mexico. And then striped skunks they're just ubiquitous in the United States. They really don't distribute too far down into Mexico. So moving on to the hognose, and I want to show you the picture there at the top right. Then we'll go back and look at that striped skunk. Good job. So those 2 are pretty hard to tell apart, except for the forehead stripe. So that's really the defining characteristic when you're looking at between the genera, is that the Methodus have that forehead stripe and the Conopatus do not. Now there's four species of hognose skunks, and the American hognose skunk is the only one that we have here in America. And I think the striped skunk gets up into Latin America. And these guys are found in the arid U.S. Southwest. And the one here at the bottom here, that's actually a collared skunk from one of Dr. Dowell's previous students. and they've got a really neat colloquial name that I've always liked. They call him the Texas Ruger. Now we get to the real good stuff. We get into Spalagale. So there's actually 4 different species of Spalagale. The top one there is a pygmy, and these are by far the smallest of all skunks. As an adult, they average between 200 and 300 grams. But even the larger ones, like the ones we're working at here in Houston, the males average 600-700 grams, and the females are about 400. So all of these species are relatively small, and they have these very fusiform body conditions, and that's because these little guys they're much more omnivorous and carnivorous than their larger lumbering cousins. They readily eat quite a few small mammals, and they'll prey upon herps, amphibians, reptiles, grassland bird nests. They love to get in there and eat the eggs. And they actually have this really unique behavior for cracking the eggs, especially some of the larger type eggs. Is if they can't bite the tip of it with their mouth and crack it that way, what they'll do is they'll take the egg between their front 2 paws, and just like a quarterback will hike or a center will hike the football to a quarterback, they'll take the egg and toss it as hard as they can between their back legs at something hard, and they'll keep doing this until the egg breaks, and then they can feed upon it. So spotted skunks actually are pretty unique in that they not only have this cryptic or this aposematic warning coloration, but there's been a lot of research that shows that the broken pattern of black and white stripes on their dorsum actually works as camouflage. It works really well, and I can tell you from tracking these guys out in the prairie, I can't tell you how many times you have to step on the skunk, or it's right between your feet before you ever see it and realize where it's at. They just blend in so well. And then one of the things they're probably most known for is this handstand warning behavior. So if they see any type of threat, or they even become startled, they'll jump up on their front 2 paws like this, and they'll dance back and forth towards whatever the threat is. And actually, from this pose, they can actually spray whatever the threat is from this pose, albeit much more likely they're going to get back down on all 4s. And while this is the most ornate of the warning type behavior, there's a warning type behavior in all the other skunk species, albeit most of them are just kind of patting their front 2 feet, or maybe they'll do a false charge at the threat. Acrobats. So these little guys they're actually arboreal. They'll pretty readily climb trees if there's trees available to either forage or to find some type of cover for diurnal resting. Oh, and they're scoundrels. They are certainly scoundrels, and that's both from a human perspective and in the perspective of, I guess, of other mesocarnivores. So they really like climbing up into people's houses, and they'll get into your chicken house, and they'll get into they'll get into your chicken coop. They'll kill your chickens. They'll eat the eggs. They love to climb up into people's vehicles and then take a ride and go somewhere. And from the perspective of other mesocarnivores, you can look on YouTube for some of this stuff. But there's a lot of video of especially cougar cache cams, where the cougar has killed a deer, and its researchers come and put a camera up on it. And spotted skunk comes and finds it, and once he finds it, that's his kill. And whenever the cougar shows back up, the spotted skunk starts doing his warning behavior, and he scares the cougar off. The cougar just kind of goes back and sits back and says, "Well, I'll wait my turn." Also, we've seen some things with gray foxes, in that really interesting behavior. The spotted skunk will strike the trail of a gray fox, and then it'll just start following the gray fox. We've got a lot of evidence of that, video evidence, pictorial evidence of the following, but we haven't actually taken pictures of what they're doing. And what we think is happening is that as soon as the gray fox, makes a kill and is about to eat it, the spotted skunk just runs up in there and scares the gray fox off of the kill. And then kind of the last thing here I thought was pretty funny is if you start looking at some of the really, really old literature, and what I'm talking about is from the 1920s, but a gentleman in the American Society of Mammalogists, postulated in a journal entry that maybe spotted skunks, because of their erratic type behavior, maybe they were sexually frustrated because they couldn't find mates. And I think we could probably put that hypothesis to bed, but just really interesting looking at, what the ideas on these guys are throughout the years. All right, so right before we get into actually talking about our current research, we're going to go through spotted skunks here in the state of Texas. So we do have both the eastern western, and the easterns are there in blue, and the westerns are in purple. Within the state, they are a species of greatest conservation need. However, all of them are both species. You can still trap both species. Historically, they were probably sympatric, but right now we don't have a definitive answer that they are. Albeit there in the Colorado Bend area, northwest of Austin, I've got two adjacent counties and 40, 50 miles apart, where we've got a real good populations of easterns, and then in the southwestern county, we've got a good population of westerns. And one of the ways they differentiate between each other is that there is, within the state of Texas, there is a pretty good difference in their striping patterns. But there's two other ways. There's some chromosomal or the number of chromosomes is different between the two species. And the western spotted skunk actually undergoes breeding in late summer, early fall, and then a 6-month delayed implantation, where the eastern spotted skunk breeds in late winter and early spring, and 7 to 10 week delayed implantation. So they're isolating themselves via breeding strategies. So that is my last one for that quick primer. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free as I switch over.
I'll put you on the big screen while you switch over. Feel free to start.
So, Dr. Grisham, you're a little bit muted at the moment.
Can you? Wow, this is how I know I have tenure now. Is that I cannot work technology at all. I didn't want to interfere with Clint's presentation. So, Clint, I have found myself suddenly enthralled by spotted skunks. They're beautiful creatures, and two, they're quite talented. What is their aromatic disposition compared to, say, like a striped skunk?
Well, the literature says that it's a little more pungent than some of the other species, but I don't think it's quite as bad. I think it has a fruitier, sweeter type smell.
Describe it like you would a whiskey.
Yeah.
So, you have your other presentation pulled up. I'm going to give the audience a few minutes to ask any questions about distribution of skunks in Texas before you talk about your specific research. Students on the call, do you guys have any questions for Clint?
Yeah, so how would you quantify skunk smell? Is there a good range for you to quantify them on, or just any rule of thumb?
Well, that's one of the really interesting things about getting sprayed by a skunk versus smelling it in the wild or on a roadkill animal or on your dog. Once that skunk sprays, it starts mixing with the oxygen in the air, and it changes the smell and the disposition of the chemical. But also what happens if you personally get sprayed, within 15 seconds, 20 seconds, it so overpowers your nose that you go nose blind and you don't even notice it.
Yeah, that's
So I
amazing.
guess
Go ahead.
the next question is, how many times have you been sprayed?
Quite a few.
Yeah.
I'm up to 3 species now: eastern striped and hognose.
Is that your bucket list? To get
Try
sprayed
not
by
to
every
get
skunk?
sprayed, but it's a hazard in the business.
They're amazing little creatures. So some of our audience members, I'm not sure of how familiar are they with skunks, but you are a skunk expert. So what is your remedy for removing the smell after being sprayed for our general audience?
Yeah, so most of it is just going to be time. That's the truth. But you can find it anywhere on the internet. It's hydrogen peroxide, baking soda, and a little bit of Dawn dishwashing detergent as a surfactant. You mix that up, and it kind of makes a paste, and you just start applying it, and take a shower, apply. And you can get most of it off, but you certainly don't want it in your beard because that stuff will stick with you for months on end.
I would smell like a skunk for years. And you're much nicer than I am. If I had a whole audience listening to me about what it takes to remove skunk smell from me, I would say, well, you have to slather yourself in peanut butter and molasses for at least every day for the next 6 weeks. So we have a question from Emily. Hi, Emily. It's good to hear from you. She says, are all their odors same and some are different? And I suspect you answered that just a few minutes ago. It might be a time lag. But can you go over that one more time? The smells that you experienced in the field with them.
Yeah. So sure. So as soon as the animal sprays, the smell on all of the species is a whole lot sweeter and earthier, and then it starts mixing with the oxygen in the air, and that's when it becomes just that really pungent smell that you're probably familiar with. And then, like I said, I do think that spotted skunks have a little bit sweeter smell than striped skunks and Conopatus. And out of the three, I think the hognose skunk actually has, at least in my opinion, kind of the most neutral type smell. I don't think they're as bad as the other two species.
Very nice. So when we study birds and when you ban birds, some birds just have a natural tendency to be more aggressive than others, like cardinals, for example, will just destroy your cuticles when you're holding them. Are there certain skunks that are more than likely to spray you out in the wild than some of the others? Or and this is asking from the perspective of a general audience member. If they're out, with their hunting dogs or walking around, is there one or more that's more inclined to spray rather than threaten?
Well, here in Texas, it's definitely the striped skunk, but I suspect that that's really more because they're just so more abundant than the other species, and more likely to run into one of them. But I mean, you have to remember that it is costly for them to spray, so they're going to give you that warning behavior to try to get you to back off, and they really don't want to spray you.
Yeah, and that's a really good reminder to our audience. Wildlife, one, don't harass wildlife. We're all wildlife professionals here, and I think when I was a grad student, Dr. Bowl, my advisor, said the three most common attributes of a snake bite is a white male between 18 and 25, and there's alcohol involved. So the same with skunks. We love our skunks. Don't go messing with them in the wild. But that brings me to a really interesting story. When we were at the Junction campus during our first class during the Maymester, there was a hognose snake, and she had three small skunks with her. What are the baby skunks called? Are they
Kids or pups? I've heard them, mostly kids.
Okay, so she had three kits with her, and she kept approaching very like I had a detonator in my hand ready to fire a rocket net off. And she comes strolling up with her absolutely beautiful little kits. I mean, their coats were really pretty. They had that really thick white. And I'm like, all right, we're not going to fire off this net just yet. I don't want to scare her or her kits. And two, I don't want the loud explosion, to set her off because in general, and this highlights to what you said, is energetically expensive for those animals. So, are there any studies in existence about how much it actually costs a skunk energetically to actually, you know, spray as well as develop the scent and post spray mortality or anything like that?
I feel that there are, but I haven't read any recently, so I don't want to misspeak and
Okay.
say. But I will say that some of these skunks we have to do nighttime captures on,
Yeah.
especially the hognose skunks, and that's literally getting a spotlight and a tub and running around and catching the skunk, and you get sprayed quite a bit
Yeah.
during that type of capture effort, and they never run out. I mean, there's never a point where they're just done.
That's really interesting. And once again, I remind our audience: admire skunks from a distance. Don't harass them. They're, as I'm learning, they're beautiful, interesting creatures. View them with a photography lens from a distance. With that, Clint, I'm going to move the video over to my other screen and let you present your final presentation for our audience. Thank you very much for the first two. I enjoyed them very much. So you take it away, sir, and then I'll keep the updated with the chat as we go, sir.
Alrighty, so now I'm going to talk just a bit about, my research as a master's student at Angelo State, and then currently what we're doing at Tech. So just a little bit of historical context about this species and why we're actually studying it. So what I'm studying is the plain spotted skunk, and it's a subspecies that's distributed throughout the Great Plains region of North America. And historically, it was found from Tamaulipas, Mexico, all the way up into extreme southern Canada and east of the Rocky Mountains and west of the Mississippi River. And starting somewhere in the 1940s, the species started undergoing this very drastic range-wide population decline. And while we've got a pretty strong idea that this is primarily to habitat loss and habitat alteration, we think there are a few different little underlying things happening with the species that we quite haven't got our finger on yet. So as of 2012, December 2012, the subspecies went through the 90-day review. It has been in the 12-month review for listing under the Threatened and Endangered Species Act. And what is just a really unique way that this happened is that because it's a skunk, there was just this lack of research into the species. So when it came time to start looking at data for the 12-month review, everybody realized, at the agency level that there is no data on this species. And when that happened, all of the states where this species is distributed, they started getting together and started funding these real large research projects into the species. And that's how we actually got our funding from the Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts. So the first project I received funding in 2014, and we finished up in 2017. And while we looked at a few other things, kind of the big things was a species distribution model, both the historic one and then kind of one looking at current and future impacts to the distribution, and then a microsatellite genetic analyses within the entirety of the species. So what we did is we went out, very traditional traps, track plates, cameras, and we surveyed all throughout the central portion of Texas. And these were really intensive surveys, and we literally worked from the banks of the Red River to the banks of Matagorda Bay. And we had 10 different counties that we looked at. These were, like I said, very intensive. We were running about 120 devices a day for about 10 days straight. And we realized pretty early on that we were not going to be that successful at detecting the species with these traditional means. So about a year and a half into the project, we went to this crowdsourcing technique. where we started listservs and social media of all types of Texas-centric wildlife groups, including the Texas chapter. We started bombarding them with this wanted poster that we had created. And we also had this iNaturalist project, and you can see that's the picture there on the right. And this crowdsourcing stuff was just amazing. It actually accounted for 84% of the total verified spatial occurrences in the state of Texas that we were able to accumulate, and it still is. So this this top left species, our picture up there, that little fellow came to my attention just 2 weeks ago, and we had this kind of Facebook saga going on between myself and some of the folks on Facebook that are Texas-centric wildlife folks, and trying to figure somebody around Dallas Fort Worth that could go and pick up this roadkill animal. And my colleagues at the Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge, they were able to put me in contact with somebody who lived right there, and they were able to pick it up. And currently that skunk is in the freezer there in Fort Worth. And that's actually a county record for Parker County. So once we got all of our data there in 2017, we did Alexandra Schaefer. She did the genetic analyses, and what she confirmed was that the subspecies designations were correct. There are 3 subspecies of eastern spotted skunk, and that within the plain spotted skunk, there was a reduction of genetic diversity. And this was kind of somewhere right in the middle between what you would think of, a wide-ranging species like striped skunks and raccoons, and then on the lower end, something like a San Joaquin kit fox or a black-footed ferret. And then we looked, I've got this heat map here, looked at the current distribution, and you can kind of see that, we're still predicting fairly, within the central portion of the state, a fairly complex distribution. The 2 areas that we thought we had some hot spots were the cross timbers ecoregion and the coastal plains ecoregion. Even though if you look at the coastal plains down here, there's really not much showing up, but that's where we had one of our most robust individual populations. And then if we kind of look over at the current and future impacts, what we saw was that within the state of Texas, distribution was most impacted by habitat loss and alteration, and this is from row crop farming and cattle grazing. And you can see the kind of the major cities here, and you can see that urbanization is a major deal. If you look at those hot spots, and you look at DFW down to Austin, San Antonio, you look at all those hot spots, and that's the I-35 corridor right there. So urbanization is going to hit that area pretty hard. But what we found is that as far as oil and gas goes, this wasn't as big of a driver for this constricted distribution. And that was because if you look at the heat map here, 3 of the 4 largest plays within the state of Texas fall outside of this area, and 2 of them actually fall outside of the historic distribution of the species itself. All right, so kind of looking at what we're doing now, if you kind of look at, excuse me, I lost my train of thought there for a second. If you look at kind of the first level habitat use, we're looking at a landscape level across our study site and seeing, what type of distribution the species has. And then, we're doing the second level with home range ecology, and then kind of third level is we're doing this rest site and denning ecology type stuff. And then we're throwing some stuff in there about causes of mortality and population demographics. And then almost by accident, about 6 months into the project, we realized we had these extra collars laying around that we couldn't put on spotted elk. And we said, well, we can do the same thing just with striped skunks. So for the most part, we're doing this project for both striped and spotted skunks. Right. So we're down here adjacent to Houston. We're in a ecoregion or ecosystem known as the Katy Prairie, and this is a part of the West Gulf coastal plain region. Historically, this was a tall grass prairie ecosystem that was fire maintained and basic wetlands during the winter that housed a lot of wintering waterfowl. If you look at the map there, you can see that the overwhelming majority of the Katy Prairie has already been urbanized by Western Houston. And for about the last 30 years, there's been an NGO down here called the Katy Prairie Conservancy, and they've been both buying land and selling conservation easements. And what they've been doing is they're not only trying to just conserve general prairie conservation from an ecosystem standpoint, but they're also conserving kind of the rural way of life in this area. So they'll send a conservation easement on some rice farmers and ranchers and stuff like that. So even though some of this land here is conserved, it really might not be suitable for skunks, but it is still a very rural type land. And then we just kind of zoom in here and look at the individual study site. We've got two of them here, and these are about 10,000 acres, the two in the dark green, and they're just a couple miles apart. Both of these have active cattle grazing on them. There's a lot of active management. There's a lot of prescribed burn, a lot of mechanical manipulation of invasive plant species, and rotational grazing of the cattle between pastures. Right. So we're doing really intensive camera trap surveys, and we're using this for our occupancy modeling and to inform our live trapping surveys and to look at some of the mesocarnivore interactions out here on the prairie. And in our first year, we were running 120 cameras per season just being winter, spring, summer, fall. And they're baited with these sardines. And when we first started off, we were trying a few new things. We had 3 different camera trap types. We had a couple different bait types, and we really found that our techniques at the very beginning were not that efficient. So we had some major revisions for year 2, and that's really paid dividends for us. So we're out here trapping, and we're using just your standard tomahawk live traps, and we're putting grid surveys out 100 meters apart, and we've got 2 different baits we're using. One of them is a chub mackerel, and the other is just this little sweet concoction that we made that's pretty much peanut butter and jelly with marshmallows and chicharrones. And we trap in 2 different types of pastures. So we randomly choose some pastures, and then we also trap in pastures that we know has a spotted skunk in it because we just recently saw it on trail camera. Once we catch the little fellers, we affix a GPS transmitter to them, and these transmitters are a little less than 20 grams, and we have them programmed to take 4 to 8 spatial fixes per day. And while we have them knocked out, we take all your standard morphometric measurements, and we take 5 or 6 different biological samples from each individual. So once they're released, we start tracking them on a weekly basis, and we track them to their diurnal resting location. We download all the data off the collar, and we can do that remotely. We record the location of where they're resting, and then we start coming back a few days later to see if the skunk has evacuated that location. And as soon as they evacuate it, we come in and we do these veg habitat surveys. And we actually do 2 surveys, so it's a paired type of survey. And you can see all the different things that we're measuring there. And I'm not going to go through them, but if you look at this picture here, one thing you'll hear me talk about a lot as we go on is McCartney rose. So this is an invasive shrub that can get just huge, dense, impenetrable thickets, and it can get up to 4 or 5 meters in height. And it's just a really nasty, overgrown rose bush. But the skunks seem to really like these things, so we're always walking and dealing with these rose bushes. All right. So we've had our cameras operational since January of last year. And in year one, we had only 35 total detections. And you can see we only had one in winter. Well, I was the only one here working by myself in winter. And then it started this incremental increase throughout the rest of the year. And that was what we were doing there is, changing all of our techniques to get a little more efficient. And it's really worked because we've done about 1 1/3 of season so far this year, and we've already got 53 total detections.
Oh, very nice.
And this is, like I said, really important because that's what informs our trapping surveys. And last year, when we first started off, we didn't have any occupied pastures to go trap because we weren't finding them on camera.
Yeah.
So we started our live tapping in January of last year, and we were pretty continuous up until the COVID-19 stuff started, and we kind of got shut down. But so far, we've had 55 captures of 25 unique skunks, and we've had traps out a little over 5,000 trap nights, which equates to about 1.1 skunk per every 100 trap nights. And you might be looking at that and going, ooh, that's terrible. But within, eastern spotted skunk circles, I mean, I can kind of hold my head up high and kind of, brag about that number a little bit. We've got a skewed sex ratio, males to females, which that's actually pretty typical within this species. And we have a very skewed adult to subadult age ratio, and that's really probably just due to bias in the timing that we've trapped so far over the last year. So looking at kind of some of the diurnal resting site stuff, is I mentioned that McCartney Rose is extremely important. And this is Cameron Jefferson. This is actually her research. She's doing this for her thesis. And what she's telling me, she's looked at some of this data, is that 75% of the time, the skunk is going to be in a diurnal resting place that is underneath one of these McCartney rose bushes. And within her plots, what she's finding is that 10% or less than 10% has actual canopy cover there. And that's what the spatial data from the GPS collars is showing too, that these species here on the prairie, they are actively avoiding any place where there's trees. And finally, one of the really neat things is that even though these guys, they will dig these burrows, which you see here in the bottom right hand, for the most part, about, I don't know, I think it's about 2 to 1, they're just going to crawl up inside a grass, some type of grass underneath that McCartney rose bush. And they're just going to kind of make them a little depression in that grass, and they're going to sleep above ground. All right. So just a little discussion, I think I actually mentioned all this. We had those really low detections in year one, but things have really turned around for us. We feel really confident right now in our techniques and our ability to use camera traps to go out and detect these skunks. And we were supposed to start kind of this spring getting out across the entirety of Katy Prairie and started looking for skunks everywhere instead of just on our survey site that I showed you earlier. And this has really been kind of the biggest thing that COVID-19 has hit us, and we don't really know if we're going to be able to accomplish this objective because obviously we can't get out and meet people and shake hands and go ride around and survey their properties. So kind of this right here is actually going to be the basis of our first paper from this individual project, and we've actually got it. It's going to be in the special Eastern Spotted Skunk issue of the Southeastern Naturalist coming out next year. And what we've shown is that the chub mackerel has higher capture success than the sweet bait, but individual skunks have this 100% preference to the sweet bait over multiple captures. And what we're seeing is that, if you go to catch this animal at its den site or at its diurnal location, and you put out 4 traps, bait equals between them, I mean, they're just going to go back and back and back, always to that sweet bait. And then what we've also shown is that, yeah, if we have the a priori knowledge that a pasture is occupied, we're doing much better at capturing skunks during those surveys than just randomly picking a pasture and going to trap. So we made mention earlier that this McCartney Rose is super important. You know, it provides cover and weather, cover from weather and predators for the species. But what we're seeing, that might not be good. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. What we're seeing is that they're not just randomly using these McCartney roses. What they're using is kind of an intermediate growth phase. So they're not using the ones that are just starting to bolt up above the prairie, and they're not using the ones that are really tall, 4 or 5 foot or 4 or 5 meters tall. They're using these ones that are about a meter to 2 meters. And what you're seeing is that the bush has bolted above the grasses, and then it's starting to shoot out all these shoots into the grass. And that's where they're staying. They've got the grass there that they can crawl in, and then they've got these offshoots from the main branch of the McCartney Rose. And then, they're not using forested areas, which if you look at all the other eastern spotted skunk research that's going on, it's showing that, they prefer forested areas and they're really avoiding prairie-type habitats. All right, so we're getting pretty close to finishing up here, but I was telling you about some of this management on the property, and what we've seen is that when they come in and they do a prescribed burn or they do a mechanical chop or a bush hog or something like that, it's dispersing these skunks from their home ranges. But if you can get a growing season or 2 back in that pasture, the skunks are returning. And as a matter of fact, I just saw this today. So this burn here is actually from, I think it was December 5th. And I've had cameras in that pasture for the last 3 weeks. And here in the last week, I've got my first detections of skunks moving back into that pasture and starting to utilize it again. And then, so spotted skunks versus mesocarnivores. So I don't know what the driver behind this is yet, but coyotes and striped skunks are extremely abundant out on our study site. And what we're seeing is that these places where we have our camera traps, if there's continued occupancy, each season we go there and we run our camera traps, you're not seeing any other type of mesocarnivores whatsoever. It is just spotted skunks and nothing else. Now, maybe some of the more spurious observations where, you get one detection in a year, you're seeing coyotes and striped skunks and all the other mesocarnivores there. And I didn't talk to you too much about the striped skunks, but I will make mention here, it's Matt Hamilton. He's the Angelo grad student that's really looking at this resource partitioning. And what he's seeing is that striped skunks are using these really open pastures, whereas spotted skunks are using these really minimally managed pastures. And the spotted skunks are internal within the pastures, and the striped skunks never go internal. They're always out on the open edges. And it appears right now cattle presence is not any type of impact to spotted skunk occupancy. And that's, I don't know, that's because of the rotational grazing, or it's just not that big of a deal. So I'll have to do a little bit more research into that. And then this picture here, I told you guys that, the spotted skunks do the handstand. Well, every once in a while, you can find you a striped skunk that can get that big old butt up in the air and get them a handstand going. So that's what that is. And the next pictures, he did not stay up long. But this little gal here, she spent just minutes, dozens and dozens of minutes doing a handstand for her mom when they finally got reunited after we caught both of them in the same day. So those are everything I have for you guys tonight, and I appreciate everybody turning in, and I appreciate TWS for having me. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Clint, thank you very much for those presentations. Do you mind sharing your screen so we can get everybody up on the board?
Oh, yeah.
There's no rush. Thank you, sir. Do our viewers have any questions for Clint pertaining to striped skunks? And I'm aware I'm doing this right now. I'm about to see what I can do here. Any questions at all?
You were very thorough on everything. You answered all the questions.
100% questions answered.
Just reading mine out here.
So Justin asked asked the question: How do you get the color on the animal without getting sprayed?
And so we actually anesthetize our animals, so we put them under, and when they're under, they're real easy to work with. Typically, we don't get sprayed. If you do get sprayed, it's in the process of giving them that first oral inhaler, put them down.
So that's what type of chemical immobilization do you use? Or do you use a certain?
We've got a two-part system where we put them down just for a second with ISO to give them that first knockdown, and then we pull them out real quick and give them an injection of T-Lizol.
Very nice. How long do they stay under once you have that administered?
Well, we've got our process down to taking about 15, 16 minutes. So I've got the dosage lined up so that they're only down about 20 minutes.
Very nice. Do you have to give them a reversal drug for any of that?
We're not doing that right now.
Okay, I didn't know if that was the process with skunks and stuff. So the students taught me how to display an image on the background. So this is going to be my new background image until Dr. Conway joins us as a form of protest. So this is our department chair, that's our department chair, Warren Garrett. That's a lark sparrow. He hates being on screen. So I'm going to have this as my background until he joins us. Austin Hargrove. Austin, good to see you. At least I hope it's Austin. He's the only Hargrove I know. Asked, is there any monetary ecological incentives for landowners for keeping skunks around on their properties?
So I don't know about monetary.
Yeah.
There might be something in the future.
Okay.
Spotted skunks, and maybe not necessarily spotted skunks themselves, but just having the type of habitat that you're managing that you would have spotted skunks in. And that's really an ecological reason for trying to keep them around, is that it's probably indicative that you have a pretty healthy natural type ecosystem going on there.
Very good. I do have a question for you. You said that in the discussion portion of your presentation that the spotted skunks will sleep in the open grass provided by that to protect themselves from predators. What are some of the both mammalian and avian predators for spotted skunks?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. What are actually some of the mammalian and avian predators for spotted skunks?
Okay. Mammalian, by far, it's coyotes is the largest one. But as a percentage, owls. Owls are actually the largest predator of spotted skunks.
Very nice. Officers, do you have any questions for Clint?
No, I don't have any questions. I don't know about Abraham and Olivia, but we really appreciate you having coming on the podcast and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm going to give our audience few seconds to chime in while we wait here and enjoy the beautiful backgrounds. I had his department chair Tom in it, but it filtered it out, so I'm kind of sad about that. I might get in trouble for this later. I might get fired.
It's okay. It happens.
Benefits of having tenure. Clint, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed the presentations and learning more about skunks. I suspect everyone else did. It's something we don't hear about that often, and it's kind of the information that we're looking to disseminate with this podcast and stream. So I really appreciate your time and efforts. I know being a PhD student in the field during a pandemic while coordinating a field crew is tough. And I know you're taking time out of a very busy schedule to tell us about skunks. So we greatly appreciate you presenting this material for all of our viewers today. That said, for anyone viewing in, if you would like to join us, we have plenty of open spots, and it appears we're going to be home for a while. And we want to hear about what you do with wildlife, regardless of where you're at. So if you're interested in joining us, please just shoot me an email. It's my name. My name is right here. It's Blake Grisham. It's blake.grisham at ttu.edu. Feel free to shoot me an email, and we'd love to have you. Next week, we have Dr. John Tomacek with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. He will be with us talking again about mesocarnivores, but mostly coyotes and foxes, as well as some information about feral hogs. He's also the current president of the Texas chapter of the Wildlife Society and the student chapter advisor for A&M on the main campus. So he will be joined by this officer suite as well as our new officer suite joining in for the next year to introduce themselves. Micah and Olivia will be announcing our officer of the year as well as our member of the year, and we have all sorts of other surprises prepared for you next week. With that, we're going to sign off. Thank you guys for tuning in for an hour and 20 minutes of skunk talk tonight. It was not rancid, it was amazing. Clint, once again, thank you for tuning in. This will be uploaded to YouTube, and I will share the links tomorrow on all of our social media accounts, and it will be uploaded to Anchor as soon as I figure out how to filter out all the background noise. I hope everybody tuning in has a safe and wonderful night. Thank you for joining us. And once again, thank you guys. Have a lovely night.